Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to Cheating Stories Bests so you don't miss out on our latest updates. Today's tale involves a year-long affair that culminates in an unexpected twist. Sit back and enjoy. "I'm leaving," I announced with an air of finality. "Fine. Don't come back," Jenna shot back, her voice as cold as her gaze. Usually, when I walked out the door, I'd throw a harsh parting remark over my shoulder. But today was different. I didn't want my last words to her to be so bitter. Over the past 14 years of marriage, we'd exchanged such harsh words more times than I could count, but this time felt different. I knew I wouldn't be coming back this time, and perhaps, with a few days' distance, she might start to understand the gravity of what had transpired. For the past 6 months, Jenna's behavior had taken a troubling turn. Her words had become increasingly sharp and hurtful. I couldn't fathom what had caused this shift. To avoid escalating the situation, I began to distance myself from her. I spent more and more time away from home, often returning late after Jenna and our 13-year-old daughter had already eaten dinner. Sometimes, when I got home, there were only scraps left. Other times, even the leftovers had been tossed. I'm Kurt Kaminsky, though my full name is David Kurt Kaminsky. To avoid confusion with my father, also named David, I've always gone by Kurt. I'm not a junior, my father's name is David John Kaminsky. I've never understood why he didn't give me the junior tag, but I was stuck with Kurt, or nothing. Yes, I'm Polish, or at least, American of Polish descent. I've heard all the jokes about that. Living in a small town of about 10,000 people, I've been the butt of many such jokes. Though technically, I'm only half Polish, the rest of my heritage includes German, French, Irish, and English. But with a surname like Kaminsky, Polish jokes were inevitable. My wife, Jenna, who will soon be my ex-wife, turned out to be someone entirely different from what I thought. I discovered this just 4 weeks ago. Her cruel words and actions over the past months had pushed me to my breaking point. One Monday evening, while having a bite at a local restaurant, I overheard a conversation in the next booth. To my shock, Jenna and my best friend, George Carey, were talking openly about their affair. It was a crushing blow. They discussed how they'd been spending time together while I was obliviously working in the parking lot. I hurriedly left, hoping they wouldn't notice me. George, who had been a trusted friend and even served as the chauffeur at our wedding, was now the source of my betrayal. He was my mechanic, though technically an independent contractor. I'd always relied on him for car repairs, and despite his jest about not respecting himself if he were my employee, he was deeply reliant on my business. I drove aimlessly around the neighborhood, grappling with disbelief. Could this really be happening? I questioned whether George was just playing games. I could have hired a private investigator, but their meetings were so infrequent, only twice a month, that it might not be worth the expense. Instead, I decided to check Jenna's phone and email. When I got home, Jenna was as aloof as ever. It suited me, I didn't want to engage until I had concrete evidence. After she went to bed on her side of the bed, I quietly got up and accessed her email. There was nothing particularly incriminating, but her phone, locked with a password, was another matter. It didn't take me long to figure out that our daughter's birth date was the code. I sifted through her messages and found some that could be misinterpreted but none directly from George. His name was in her contacts, understandable since he was a close friend. Perhaps their conversations were merely friendly. But deep down, I knew something was off. The day ahead would be one of confronting the painful truth and making decisions that would forever alter our lives. The weight of betrayal hung heavily over me, and the journey to unravel this mess had just begun. Even with the humor George often injected into conversations about Poland, his recent behavior had me wondering if something was amiss, not necessarily with George, but perhaps with someone else. I spent the night tossing and turning, unable to find rest. It must have been around 2:43 a.m. when I last checked the clock, still restless and consumed by thoughts. The next morning at the car dealership, George was his usual self, making light-hearted comments about Poland. Normally, I would have laughed it off, but today I couldn't. "George," I said, my tone more serious than usual, "how much do you actually know about Poland? If I handed you a world map, would you even be able to point it out? You make jokes about how all Poles are foolish, but I'm sure they could find the US and maybe even our state on a map. Maybe it's time you educated yourself." George looked at me, clearly unsure how to respond. He knew I was right, geography wasn't his strong suit. His knowledge lay more in street smarts and mechanical skills rather than academics. Back in high school, I had helped him with his studies just so he could graduate. Now, as I reevaluated my choice of friends and even my spouse, I found myself questioning my decisions. I retreated to my office, closing the door behind me. I needed to gather evidence, but confronting them directly would likely lead to denials. I needed proof. I reached out to a private investigator in Santa Fe, sharing my concerns. He informed me that tracking them would be costly, especially since the incidents seemed to happen only twice a month. Instead, he suggested installing a tracking app on my wife's phone. He also mentioned the possibility of setting up cameras in our home but warned that inexpensive ones might be discovered. I opted for the tracking app and assured him of my payment for his services, despite his insistence that I owed him nothing. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I quietly installed the tracking app on my wife's phone and synced it with mine. It would run discreetly in the background, unnoticed by her. The next day, I monitored her whereabouts through the app. She worked part-time at the university bookstore, spending 15 to 20 hours a week there. Her free time was often spent at the salon, and she also made trips to the grocery store before returning home. Meanwhile, George was home most of the day but conveniently absent whenever Jenna was around. This provided some reassurance that nothing untoward had occurred. Determined to mend relationships with my wife and daughter, I suggested we have dinner out together. Though Jenna appeared apprehensive, and Carrie showed her typical teenage reluctance, I insisted. Dinner was pleasant enough, but I couldn't help but mention George in our conversation. Jenna's discomfort was palpable as she quickly changed the subject, only adding to my suspicions. That evening, I resisted the urge to check Jenna's phone again, though I had no success with calls or messages. She either deleted them promptly or hadn't made any at all. As we settled into bed, I thanked Jenna for joining us for dinner. Her response, a mix of gratitude and a suggestive gaze, stirred conflicting emotions within me. If she had been unfaithful, did I still desire intimacy with her? I resolved to wait for concrete evidence before initiating anything further. I decided to let her make the first move, hesitant to act on my own until I had confirmed my suspicions. Eventually, we did engage in intimacy, but it was lackluster. There's no need to detail the specifics, but I found some enjoyment in it. For the remainder of the week, I continued to monitor the location of her phone, finding nothing unusual. On Saturday evening, after she had fallen asleep, I checked her phone once more for messages or calls, but again, found nothing. I was nearly convinced that George was simply boasting, fabricating stories to impress someone with his supposed exploits. This wasn't the first time I had encountered his tendency to exaggerate. As I lay in bed, my mind continued to race, and despite my exhaustion, I found it impossible to sleep. It was 2 a.m., and unable to rest, I got out of bed and went downstairs. I sat in the dimly lit living room, a glass of Jack Daniels and Coke in one hand, and Jenna's phone in the other. My mind raced as I contemplated whether this drink might ease the turmoil within me. With a steady hand, I entered our daughter's birth date into the phone, unlocking it. The screen illuminated with a stark reality that hit me like a jolt of electricity. The significance of our daughter's birth date was striking. Her arrival had been fraught with complications. During Jenna's pregnancy, there were moments when we feared for our baby's life. Her Rh factor didn't match mine, and it seemed like her body was fighting against the baby growing inside her. For the last 3 weeks of her pregnancy, Jenna was on bed rest, desperately trying to carry our baby to term. She succeeded, and Carrie was born exactly 9 months after our wedding. We were overjoyed to have a healthy baby, but Carrie proved to be a challenging child. Constant crying, difficulty sleeping, and reluctance to nurse made those early years tough. By her 2nd year, Jenna was adamant about not having another child. Although I was saddened by this decision, the strain of Carrie's arrival had dimmed the joy in our lives. Carrie, born precisely 9 months after our wedding, was often referred to as a wedding night baby, a result of our honeymoon intimacy. As I pieced together the details, a troubling realization hit me. If George's accusations were true, there was a strong possibility that Jenna was already pregnant before our wedding. Jenna had been on birth control pills, but we didn't wait until marriage to be intimate. In fact, it had been a significant part of our relationship. The doctor had suggested that the stress of the wedding might have rendered the pills ineffective. If they were ineffective on our wedding night, it's possible they were ineffective before as well. This meant there was a 50% chance I might not be Carrie's biological father. Determined to find out the truth, I took action. As the saying goes, the early bird catches the worm, but in George's case, it seemed more fitting to say, the early worm catches the birdie. I rose from the couch, heading to the bathroom to grab some cotton swabs. I made my way to Carrie's room, where she lay sound asleep, finally settling into a good sleep schedule at 4 years old. Gently, I took a swab of the inside of her cheek and carefully sealed it in a plastic bag. I repeated the process for myself, preparing to get to the bottom of this mystery. Sunday was devoted to household chores, and I took care to avoid any extended interaction with Jenna or Carrie, trying to mask my anxiety. Jenna eventually noticed my distant demeanor and asked about it. I quickly spun a tale about business plans to cover my tracks. She always referred to the business as ours, which was somewhat comforting, though I had set up a separate entity to protect my personal assets. Living in a conservative community, I was cautious not to let business matters spill over into my personal life. I had already paid off credit cards and minimized financial risks, preparing for any potential fallout if Jenna discovered my plans. This sudden clarity prompted me to take decisive action. Early Monday morning, I took the samples to Western New Mexico University, seeking a consultation with the head of the science department about genetic testing. They were accommodating and offered to conduct the tests as part of their cellular and molecular biology program. In exchange for the samples, I handed over some of my business cards and promised a 10% discount on future purchases. The head of the department seemed appreciative of the gesture. I was contemplating replacing my Camry with a newer model, so I mentioned I might stop by to check out their selection. It was a casual mention to cover up my anxiety about the test results. As I left the university, I wore a smile, though it was tinged with worry. The results could change everything. While I told Jenna I was considering new cars to fill my lot, it was merely a distraction from my inner turmoil. The reality of what lay ahead weighed heavily on me. I summoned Paul, my accountant, loan officer, and part-time salesperson, to my office to discuss a new idea I had. "Paul," I began, "I'm considering making a significant change. I'd like to pay off the mortgage on my house with a lump sum payment. Can we discuss this possibility and work out the details?" Paul agreed to look into it. "Let me review the financials and get back to you after lunch," he said as he left my office. I toyed with the idea of calling my lawyer for a referral to a family attorney but decided to hold off. I wanted to see how things played out before making any further decisions. After all, I still had no concrete evidence that my wife was having an affair. After lunch, Paul returned with a detailed spreadsheet. We discussed the next steps for both paying off the mortgage and my other plans. The following 2 days felt interminable as I anxiously awaited the results of a DNA test. On Wednesday evening, the head of the department called to let me know he was coming over with the results and to check out the car. When he arrived, I directed him to my office, where his solemn expression immediately conveyed the gravity of the news. He confirmed what I had feared: the 2 DNA samples were unrelated. I nodded, though I was clearly devastated by the confirmation. He gave me a moment to process and handed me a manila envelope containing the results. I looked up at him, my mind racing. "So, what kind of car were you interested in?" I asked, trying to shift my focus. He mentioned he was looking at sports cars, specifically the Mazda Miata. I told him I didn't have one but planned to attend an auction the next day to find a car in good condition. I promised to call him that afternoon with an update. After he left, I informed Anna that I would be leaving early but assured her that I would be available by phone if she needed me. I knew she'd manage just fine without me. She was more than capable of handling whatever came up. I spent the evening driving around the city, feeling as though everything had changed, even though it was just the same old streets. I called my lawyer to inform him of the situation. He expressed sympathy and referred me to a trusted colleague who could handle the legal aspects moving forward. I scheduled an appointment for the following evening. While having a snack at a local restaurant, I couldn't help but reflect on the past 15 years. Had they all been a waste? I had no biological children from this marriage, though I still considered Jenna's daughter somewhat my own. I grappled with feelings of betrayal and uncertainty about what to do next. The truth was clear: I couldn't pretend I didn't know. Now that I had this knowledge, there was no turning back. I was certain of one thing: George would pay. The fact that he had been my best friend didn't matter anymore. Friends like him were hardly worth having. Jenna would pay too. Whether she knew or not, she had kept the secret of her affair with my best man hidden from me. The revelation that they had been together at least twice a month fueled my anger. I realized I needed to be alone to avoid doing something rash. I should have called Jenna to tell her I wouldn't be home that evening, but I decided to handle it differently. I called her and said, "Hey, I'm heading to Albuquerque to be ready for an auction at 8 a.m. tomorrow. I won't be home tonight." Her response was curt but polite: "Oh, okay. Have a good trip." Her nonchalant reaction made me wonder if she might take advantage of my absence. The logistics would be tricky, and she'd likely have to blame Carrie's whereabouts on my parents if questioned. I decided to monitor her phone's location throughout the evening to see if she made any unexpected moves. As I drove towards Albuquerque, I planned to buy at least 20 cars, including a Mazda Miata, and arrange for them to be picked up and delivered to my lot after the auction. I considered who would handle the mechanical inspections. I knew George wouldn't be getting any more work from me. After all, he would undoubtedly see dollar signs when he heard about my car purchases. But whatever his expectations, this time, he wouldn't benefit from my business. Thanks for sticking with us. Be sure to subscribe to Cheating Stories Best so you don't miss out on any new episodes. Today's story revolves around a long-term affair that ended with a baby. Here's a gripping tale with a similar plot. Enjoy. "I'm leaving," I declared, my voice steady but edged with a hint of finality. Jenna's response was cold and curt: "Fine, and don't come back." Normally, I'd have left with a parting remark that left no room for misinterpretation, but this time, I didn't want my final words to be filled with anger. Over the 14 years of our marriage, harsh exchanges had become a part of our routine. But this time, I knew I wouldn't be returning. Jenna's behavior had grown increasingly hurtful over the past 6 months. Her remarks were sharp and biting, and I found myself avoiding her more and more, spending long hours away from home. I would often come back to find our 13-year-old daughter, Carrie, already having had dinner, with nothing left for me but leftovers, or sometimes, nothing at all. My name is Kurt Kaminsky. Technically, my full name is David Kurt Kaminsky, but to avoid confusion with my father, who also shares the name David, everyone calls me Kurt. I'm not a junior. My father's full name is David John Kaminsky. I've never really understood why he didn't name me David Jr., but I was stuck with Kurt. Yes, I'm Polish, or more precisely, an American of Polish descent. And yes, I've heard all the jokes about it. Living in a small town with a population of around 10,000, I've been the subject of many such jokes. Even though I'm only half Polish, my other half is German, French, Irish, and English. My surname makes me a prime target for those jokes. Jenna, soon to be my ex-wife, turned out to be someone I didn't recognize. I discovered her betrayal just 4 weeks ago. Her cruel words and actions over the past months had driven me away, and I learned of her affair in a most unexpected place. One Monday evening, while grabbing a bite at a local restaurant, I overheard a conversation that shattered my world. Jenna and my best friend, George, were talking about how they had been seeing each other behind my back. George, who had been my mechanic and even chauffeured us at our wedding, had betrayed me. The realization hit me like a thunderbolt. Jenna was not just having an affair, she had been involved with George on a regular basis. I left the restaurant in shock, needing time to process the devastating revelation. Jenna and George had been seeing each other at least twice a month, and I had been oblivious. If George's claims were true, Jenna might have been pregnant before our wedding night, which would explain the complications during Carrie's pregnancy. Jenna had been on birth control, and we had been intimate before marriage. The doctor had mentioned that stress could render the pills ineffective, and if that were the case, Jenna could have been pregnant before our wedding. The thought that there was a 50% chance I might not be Carrie's biological father was overwhelming. I decided to take action. I retrieved cotton swabs from the bathroom and carefully collected DNA samples from Carrie while she slept peacefully in her room. I did the same for myself, sealing the samples in plastic bags. I needed to know the truth about my daughter, but I also had to prepare for whatever else might come my way. Sunday was spent doing household chores, each of us focusing on our responsibilities. I avoided lengthy interactions with Jenna or Carrie, my mind preoccupied with the truth I was about to uncover. Jenna noticed my strange behavior and questioned me, but I offered a fabricated explanation about business plans. While she spoke of our business, I had actually established a separate entity to safeguard my personal assets. On Monday morning, I took the samples to Western New Mexico University and spoke with the head of the science department about genetic testing. They were accommodating and offered to conduct the tests through their cellular and molecular biology program. I provided them with my business cards and mentioned that they would receive a discount if they needed a vehicle in the future. The head of the department seemed appreciative, and I left the university with a mix of hope and apprehension. The results could potentially end my marriage, but for now, I was more focused on managing my business and personal affairs. As I returned home, exhausted from a long day, I told Jenna I was tired and heading straight to bed. She asked if I wanted dinner, but I declined, claiming I had had a late lunch. The shower was refreshing, providing a brief respite from the turmoil swirling in my mind. I lay down, attempting to find some solace in sleep as I faced an uncertain future. The weight of my problems seemed to lift as I took the first steps toward resolving them. I fell asleep almost immediately after my head hit the pillow. After a stressful week, finally starting to lay out a plan allowed my mind to unwind. I woke up early the next morning, feeling refreshed and ready to tackle the day before Jenna and Carrie even stirred. By the time my staff began arriving at the office, I was already buried in spreadsheets, financial reports, and sales forecasts. Paul walked in and I informed him of my latest purchase, a total of 23 cars, and mentioned that we were closing a deal on another vehicle in Albuquerque. I also instructed Anna to cease assigning any work to George but to keep it confidential. She looked at me with a curious expression but nodded. "You're the boss," she said. "Got it. Thanks, Anna. You're invaluable." At 9 a.m., I called my business lawyer to seek his advice. "Well," he began, "your business is registered, but there might still be a way for her to force you to sell it and claim half of its value. Have you considered selling it beforehand?" "No, should I?" I asked. "If you want to keep the business out of her hands, It might be worth considering, he advised. This business is my life, I can't just get rid of it, I replied. Okay, let me think about it and review the situation. I'll call you at the end of the week. His words were a blow. I had poured my heart and soul into building this business. It was like my child, unlike Carrie, who, despite being considered my own, wasn't biologically mine. My anger surged again, but I knew I had to compartmentalize. Part of being a good business person was the ability to juggle personal and professional challenges. First on my list was to call Doug, the department chair, to discuss the cars. Doug, Kurt Kinski here. I've got information on two Miatas that might interest you. One is red, and the other is black. Are you still considering it? I asked. Yes, if the price is right, Doug replied. Which color are you leaning toward? I'm not sure. Could you bring both over so I can take a look? Even if we can't agree on a price, I'm confident I can sell one without too much trouble. Which one would you recommend? Doug explained, each has its pros and cons. The fire red is a bold color but fades faster in the sun. Black is sleek and elegant but can get very hot in our climate. Will the car be kept in a garage? Yes, it will, I confirmed. If it's in the garage most of the time, the red shouldn't fade too quickly. I think I'll go with the red unless you believe black suits me better. Red sounds like a good choice. How soon can you see it? Doug asked. Is Monday or Tuesday good for you? Sure, call me when you get it, Doug replied. I then called the dealer who had the red Miata to arrange a trade. He expressed interest in the BMW I had on my property, which had been there for 3 months. He believed he could sell it more easily in a larger city. As George arrived, I noticed he had several cars that still needed repairs. Being an independent contractor, he came and went as needed, as long as the job was done on time. Overhearing some salesmen discussing the arrival of 23 cars in our warehouse, George asked, Hey Kurt, where are these cars coming from? The auction? I want to make sure I'm scheduled to handle this for you. It will be toward the end of next week or early the week after. The auction house will arrange for their delivery here, I explained. George responded, Okay, I'll check with Anna and get myself on the schedule. I chuckled to myself as he left, thinking about how George would react when he saw the influx of cars. That weekend, I made an effort to distance myself from Jenna. I busied myself with yard work and ran various errands, avoiding any need to check her phone tracker. I felt nothing but contempt for her. The realization that I was raising someone else's child was too much to bear. On Monday, I was at the car show again. I called the dealer in Albuquerque to confirm that I would drive the BMW over and pick up the Miata. He responded enthusiastically, Great, we'll have a late lunch when you arrive. It was a perfect day for a drive. I told Anna I'd be out all day. Hold the line, she said, Okay boss. Anna truly was irreplaceable. I resolved to give her a raise. The trip was enjoyable, and lunch with the dealer was pleasant. He made me feel at home, and I felt like I had gained a new friend. On the drive back in the Miata, I felt a sense of freedom. With the top down and the wind in my hair, I realized I wanted to live a little. I decided to call another dealer about getting a black Miata as well. I didn't plan to buy more than a few cars, but I wanted to make the most of this opportunity. I drove into our driveway behind the wheel of a sleek red sports car. Jenna spotted me from the window, and soon both she and Carrie were outside, clearly curious. Honey, why did you get this car? You know we need something with a back seat for Carrie, Jenna said with an edge of disdain in her voice. I just picked this up from Albuquerque for a client. Thought you might want to take a spin in it, I replied, trying to keep things light. No, honey, I don't like small cars, Jenna said dismissively. I turned to Carrie, motioning for her to come closer. What about you, Carrie? Want to give it a try? No, Dad. I already feel bad enough that kids tease me about my last name. I don't want to be seen driving around in a car from a Polish used car salesman, Carrie said, her tone dripping with teenage scorn. Her words hit me hard. I was taken aback by the sheer disrespect, and when I glanced at Jenna, she acted as though Carrie's remark was entirely justified. Great, now it seemed like both the women in my life were showing me disrespect. It made me question everything about my family life. Well, I'm going to go for another ride. I'll be back later, I said, frustration mounting as I reversed the car and drove away. I drove aimlessly around Silver City, my thoughts a tangled mess of anger and betrayal. When I finally pulled back into the driveway at 9:30 that night, I was mentally exhausted. I went straight to the bathroom for a long, hot shower, then climbed into bed, hoping the day would be a fresh start. Jenna followed me into the bedroom, her voice cutting through the silence. Are you upset because we didn't choose a sports car? Aren't you going to come down and spend time with your family? Or have you forgotten your manners along with your Polish roots? Her words were sharp, and I couldn't shake the feeling that her contempt was directly influenced by George. The way she spoke to me and the way she dismissed my Polish heritage, everything seemed tainted by her affair. As I lay in bed, my thoughts raced. I was furious and hurt, and I knew Jenna's attitude was only fueling my anger. I resolved that she would regret treating me this way. From that night onward, the Kaminsky household was filled with a chilling silence. The following day, I called Doug, a local dealer, to check out a Miata I had mentioned before. He was pleased with the deal, which was $3,000 below the Kelly Blue Book value. As we wrapped up, Doug mentioned that his best friend managed car purchases for the university and was always looking for good deals. I promised to have Jim, my contact, reach out to him. Building relationships and treating people well has always been a cornerstone of my business, and it was gratifying to see it pay off. The following Wednesday, my lawyer called with potential good news. Kurt, I think I have a solution to your problem. Can you come by this afternoon to discuss it? I agreed immediately. The atmosphere at home had become unbearable, and I was eager for some positive news. When I met with the lawyer, he presented a plan that would take about 2 weeks to implement but could potentially resolve many of my issues. During those 2 weeks, I gradually moved my personal belongings and business tools from the house to an apartment in a nearby city. George, meanwhile, was eagerly anticipating the arrival of the cars he was set to work on, though I kept putting him off. On weekends, I used the time to clear out my closet and drawers, making sure Jenna wouldn't notice the emptiness. This brings me back to that Monday night. When I told Jenna I was leaving, her response was filled with rudeness and contempt, both for my background and my profession. In the past, I might have taken refuge in a motel for a few nights to cool off. But now, things were different. Tuesday morning, after the previous night's confrontation, I arrived at the parking lot early and gathered my employees for a meeting. As I closed the conference room door behind us, I felt a renewed sense of determination. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it head-on. The morning meeting started off as usual, but with an undercurrent of change. "Good morning, everyone," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "As you know, the cars I bought a couple of weeks ago arrived yesterday afternoon. They've all been inspected and are now ready for sale. Effective immediately, we will no longer be using George's services. If he asks, just let him know that we've decided to go in a different direction." I took a deep breath, fighting back a tear. "You've all been amazing, like family to me. So, it's hard for me to share what comes next. I've sold the business." A murmur of surprise spread across the room. I quickly added, "But don't worry. Nothing will change in terms of your roles. Anna, you'll be taking on some additional responsibilities, and of course, there will be a corresponding increase in your salary." The team, even in their shock, began congratulating Anna. They all respected her and recognized she deserved it. "Anna, "I'd like to discuss a few things with you after the meeting," I said. "I'll still be involved in the company, but only on an advisory basis and occasionally for sales. I don't want to interfere with your work." Everyone seemed relieved that I'd still be around, at least occasionally. As the meeting ended and we walked out, George was waiting by the door. "Why wasn't I included in the meeting?" he demanded, clearly annoyed. "It was a staff meeting," I replied coolly. "And you're not an employee anymore." George seemed taken aback. "I see the cars have finally arrived. I'll get to work on them right away." "No, they've already been thoroughly checked and prepared for sale," I said firmly. "There's nothing for you to do." He stared at me in disbelief. "But I'll check all your cars, Kurt. What's going on?" "I sold the business," I said, trying to remain composed. "The new owner wants to take things in a different direction. I'll leave it at that for now." George's face fell as he absorbed the news. "I can't believe you sold the business. What am I supposed to do now?" I handed him a check for his last 2 weeks of work, though it wasn't much. Anna had only used his services sparingly. George had been lounging around, expecting to be busy once the 23 cars arrived. I had no sympathy for him, not after his behavior. I met with Anna privately and asked her to keep our conversation confidential. "Of course, Kurt," she assured me. "You know I won't say anything you don't want." "Here's the situation," I explained. "I've set up some companies registered in Nevada. One of these companies will buy the parking lot, and the other will buy the business. I am the sole owner of shares in both. My plan is to divorce Jenna but ensure she doesn't get her hands on the business." Anna looked concerned. "Why? What's happened?" "I've moved out of the house," I said. "Jenna doesn't know yet, but I'm not going back. She had an affair with George, and I suspect that Carrie is George's daughter, not mine. I don't even know if Jenna is aware of this, but they'll find out soon enough. I'm not going to contest the divorce but will continue paying for utilities and taxes to avoid accusations of abandonment. I want to make sure Jenna can't take over the business." Anna's eyes widened. "So, what happens next?" "I agreed to sell the company twice to make it more confusing. The proceeds from the sale will be used before the divorce is finalized. I won't be making much from consulting or occasional sales. Anna, you've been handling daily operations well, and I trust your judgment. I'll be available if you need me, but I have complete faith in you." Anna's smile returned when I mentioned the new owner, but her expression darkened when she heard about Jenna and George. She was someone I deeply admired and respected. "I have one last task for you," I said. "Please order a new sign and letterhead. We're changing the name of the business. This will reinforce in George and Jenna's minds that the business has been sold to someone else. The new name will be Helpless Car." I spelled out the name to ensure she got it right. Anna looked puzzled, but she trusted me enough to follow through. "I'll explain why I chose this name someday. For now, just know it tells the whole story," I added. With that, I said a few words of farewell to the team and left. I got into my Audi and drove towards Albuquerque. The road stretched before me, offering a brief respite from the tumult of recent events. About 2 hours into the drive, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension about what lay ahead. I glanced at my phone's caller ID and saw Jenna's name flashing on the screen. I wasn't expecting to hear from her tonight. Usually, after I storm out for a day or two, she'd call, we'd have a conversation, and I'd go back. The cycle would repeat, things would change briefly, then settle back into the same old patterns. This time, though, I was bracing for the usual excuses and justifications. I answered the call, steeling myself for the inevitable. "Hello," I said, using the speakerphone in my car. "Kurt, what's going on?" Jenna's voice was hesitant, tinged with an uncertainty I hadn't heard before. "Nothing much, just heading to Albuquerque," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Why are you going there?" she asked. To pick up a car, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. So what I heard must not be true. Jenna seemed confused. George called me and said you sold the business. Why would he call you? I asked, trying to piece together what she was saying. Well, your best friend called me. He was concerned and wanted to know if I knew what was going on. I didn't think he'd bother you about it. Jenna's voice was tinged with annoyance now. I'm just worried about how we're going to manage. Best friend? I scoffed. Seems like a joke. I'm the joke to him, the clueless fool who's been kept in the dark about his own life. It's clear my family is embarrassed by me, by my work, by who I am. Jenna's voice was filled with concern. We should have discussed this first. What about the mortgage? I paid it off with the money from selling the business. You don't need to worry about that, I said curtly. Utilities and taxes are your responsibility now. What about food, gas, insurance? Her voice was almost hysterical. Honestly, I didn't think of that. Maybe you'll have to work extra hours, I said, feeling a surge of frustration. Are you coming back? She asked, a note of desperation creeping in. No, I replied, trying to remain indifferent. You told me not to come back, so I won't. I'll make sure the utilities are paid so you don't have any issues there. Don't do this, Kurt. Please, Jenna pleaded, her voice breaking. I've already made my decision, I said, trying to sound resolute. As for Carrie, if she's ashamed of me and my job, maybe she'll be better off without me. I'm not going to let myself be belittled any longer. She's just a 13-year-old girl. You can't take it personally, Jenna tried to reason. It doesn't matter anymore, I said, cutting her off. I won't be coming back. I'm done with this. I ended the call, turning off my phone so Jenna couldn't reach me. Let her stew over it. I knew she would try to call back and be frustrated that I wasn't answering. After I calmed down, I tried to enjoy the peaceful drive to Albuquerque. I imagined Jenna would call George next, filling him in on what I had said, perhaps trying to soothe her own anxieties. Arriving at my desk in Albuquerque, I turned my phone back on and saw I had 5 messages. 3 from Jenna, 1 from George, and 1 from Anna. I immediately called Anna. Hi Anna, sorry about the phone. I had some unwanted calls, I said. Yes, I know. Jenna and George were trying to find out where you were. I told them you no longer own the business and aren't coming back, Anna said calmly. Hope everything's okay. That's good to hear, I replied. If they give you too much trouble, let them know you're considering involving the police for harassment. Don't worry, Kurt. Even if it feels like you've lost your family and friends, you still have support. Remember that, Anna reassured me. Her words were a small comfort in the midst of everything unraveling around me. As I sat in the parking lot office, Anna's words echoed in my mind, we're your family, and we always will be. Thank you, Anna. You know just what to say. I couldn't help but smile, thinking how lucky her husband was. Trust me, he knows, Anna had added. He constantly reminds me of it. Never lose this. Don't take each other for granted. I'm not going to, she assured me before we ended the call. I hesitated about whether to reach out to Jenna. But no, let them stew in their rage. I stepped out of the alley and into the office. The owner was waiting for me, eager to discuss the potential exchange. I have that Audi I mentioned. Are you ready to talk about a trade? He asked. He inspected the car meticulously, noting its pristine condition inside and out. I could sell this in a week, he said, clearly impressed. Are you sure you want to go through with the exchange? It seems like you might be getting the better end of the deal here. I'm not here to make money, I said. I'm here to get a sports car. Let's proceed. Half an hour later, I was back on the road, the top down and the wind in my hair, enjoying the drive. North seemed like the right direction, so I headed toward Santa Fe. Over the next 2 weeks, I roamed through northern New Mexico, Arizona, southern Utah, and Colorado. I wanted to stay close in case Anna needed me, but as it became clear she had everything under control, I decided to head further west. Despite the constant calls from Jenna and George, ranging from irritation to apology and eventually to bitter complaints, I remained indifferent. When I heard my credit card had been canceled, I just laughed. George's calls, in which he labeled me a terrible person for leaving Jenna and Carrie, only made me laugh harder. My lawyer sent a message updating me on Jenna's threats to file a stay-at-home order if I didn't come back. I returned his call. "Hello, this is Kurt. So, Jenna has called with threats?" I asked. "Yes, but I wouldn't worry too much," he replied. "As long as you're still paying for the house, she'll have a hard time proving abandonment. I actually have a recording where you tell her you're leaving and she asks you not to come back. If she gives us trouble, I can use it." "Send me a copy," I instructed. "If she tries anything, we'll take it to her lawyer. Let them sort it out." I promised to check in with him in a week. I continued my journey across the Southwest. The Miata wasn't the most comfortable ride, but it was exhilarating. Along the way, I caught the attention of many, even receiving occasional flirtatious glances from middle-aged women. But I wasn't interested in that, my focus was on enjoying my newfound freedom. I traveled through Reno, Lake Tahoe, the Napa Valley, and along Highway 1, taking in the breathtaking coastal views. My route took me to Yosemite, then San Diego, through Death Valley, Vegas, and finally Phoenix. I took my time, stopping in parking lots, chatting with car owners, and soaking in their envy of my spontaneous adventure. After about 3 months and 8,000 miles, I decided it was time to return to Silver City. Upon arrival at Helpless Auto, I was greeted by my entire team, including several new faces. They welcomed me back warmly. Entering Anna's office, formerly mine, I saw her smile widen as she looked up. She stood, walked around her desk, and hugged me tightly. We chatted for a while, and then I asked, "Do you think I could invite everyone to Wrangler's for food and drinks? Could you close the store at 5? I still have a few errands to run." "Of course," she said. "I'll insist on it. The whole team will be there." I said my goodbyes and promised to see everyone in 2 hours. With a positive mood, I visited my lawyer. He informed me that Jenna had attempted to claim abandonment to seize all my property, but he had thwarted her efforts. We discussed the next steps, and I felt reassured. At 5 p.m., I met the team at Wrangler Restaurant. We had a fantastic dinner, and it was refreshing to catch up with everyone. As the evening wore on, people started heading home, leaving just Anna and me. As we sat together, Anna looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, Kurt, you might think you're helpless, vulnerable, and clueless, but you were wrong. You simply trusted those you loved." I regarded her curiously. "So you figured it out?" "Yes," she said. "It took me a while, but you said the new name would tell the whole story. That idea haunted me until I understood it. You might be Polish, but those jokes don't capture the real you. They're an insult." I nodded, appreciating her insight. It felt good to have someone who truly understood. "Here's a revised and expanded version of your text." I looked at Anna with gratitude, feeling a deep sense of relief. "Thank you, Anna. You're the main reason I decided to come back. I had to see how you handled my responsibilities. I'm genuinely impressed. You haven't just stepped into my shoes, you've created a whole new pair of your own." Anna smiled warmly, acknowledging the compliment. "Thank you, Kurt. I appreciate that. I've learned a lot from you, and I'm glad I could help." We shared a hug, and she left to return to her husband, who, I knew, was a genuinely happy man. I headed back to the apartment I hadn't been in for 3 months. It was musty and needed ventilation. I opened the windows to let the cool evening air refresh the stale rooms. Grabbing a beer, I sat on the terrace, which overlooked the pool. A few people were swimming, and a family was playing nearby. As I gazed out, I reflected on Jenna and me. We had so many dreams and aspirations when we first got married, but now, all of that seemed like a distant memory. I glanced at the clock. It was about 8:30 p.m. A thought crossed my mind. It was time for a confrontation. I got up, jumped into my Miata, and drove over to my house. Technically, it was still mine. I had bought it before Jenna and I got married, and my name was the only one on the deed. However, as I pulled into the driveway, I was disappointed to see the yard was in disarray. The landscaping hadn't been touched, and the place looked neglected. The light was on inside, so I assumed Jenna was home. I went to the front door and knocked. A minute later, Carrie answered. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Dad?" she said, clearly taken aback. "Hi Carrie," I said. "Is your mom home?" She hesitated, then shouted, "Mom." I heard Jenna's tense, high-pitched voice from the kitchen. "What's the matter?" Carrie, still staring at me, responded loudly, "Dad's here." Jenna appeared around the corner, her face a mix of shock and anger. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice rising. I remained calm, even as George emerged from the bedroom, clad only in his underwear. I raised an eyebrow and said, "Oh, looks like the whole family's here, Mom, Dad, and the new addition." Jenna glared at me. "What are you talking about?" "I suppose George has taken my place now, hasn't he?" I said, trying to keep my tone even. "Jenna, it seems George has moved in after all. It's only right that he takes over." Jenna looked confused. "What do you mean?" Carrie chimed in, "He lost his apartment after you fired him, and Mom needed someone to help with the bills and responsibilities since you left." The anger in Jenna's voice was palpable. "Well, it appears you've been misinformed. George was never my employee, and I couldn't fire him. All the utilities are paid, and as for the bills, I'm not responsible for those anymore. And yes, I've been gone for a short period, but I still own the house. It's not up for grabs." "What about food and gasoline?" Jenna shouted. "You had a job," I replied, "and even though it was just extra money, it was enough for groceries and gas while I was away. So, if you think I'm just going to come back and move in, you're mistaken." "So, what are you planning to do?" Jenna asked, a hint of desperation in her voice. "I'll wait until you and George find somewhere else to live," I said, my tone final. "I'll give you both until the end of next month to find a new place. But just so you know, the house is still legally mine, even though I've been away." Jenna's eyes widened. "This is our house. It was yours before we got married, but now it's ours." "No, Jenna," I corrected her. "The law doesn't work that way. I'm still the owner, and I've been paying the utilities and taxes. As long as I'm doing that, it's my house. And as for Carrie, she's not mine by blood, and you can't change that." I turned to Carrie. "I know you hate being called Polish. So here's some good news, George is your real father, not me. You can even take his last name and become Carrie if you want." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy. Jenna's face turned pale, and George looked like a ghost. "Well, George," I said, "don't you want to be a dad? It's a shame you're shirking your responsibilities. But look at it this way, it's just 4 more years until she goes to college." Jenna and George exchanged glances, their faces a mixture of guilt and denial. I could see the tension and frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "I'm done here," I said, turning to leave. "I've said my piece. I'll be in touch with the arrangements." With that, I walked out, leaving Jenna and George to grapple with the consequences of their actions. As I drove away, I felt a strange sense of closure, knowing that I had finally confronted the mess that had unfolded while I was away. "I don't believe in that," I said firmly, tossing the DNA report onto the table. "See for yourself." Jenna and George stared at the document, their faces draining of color as they both collapsed in shock. I turned to Carrie and said, "Let the Lovebirds know that their mother will be served with divorce papers next week, along with an eviction notice." Without waiting for a response, I walked away, my mind racing. As I left, I couldn't help but question everything. Had this affair been going on throughout our marriage? Had Jenna ever been faithful to me? We first met when she came to buy a car. George was working on it, and we all thought it would make a great date. But did Jenna choose me because she genuinely wanted to be with me, or was I just a convenient option? I felt utterly helpless, ignorant, and vulnerable. All this time, George had been laughing at me behind my back and making Polish jokes right to my face. It was crushing. I returned to my apartment and drowned my sorrows in beer. The next morning, I went to see my lawyer to begin processing the divorce documents. I knew I would have to sell the house and split the proceeds. However, as a bar-working person, I wouldn't be required to pay alimony or child support, especially with another man already in the picture. I hoped. The betrayal by Jenna and George was profound. It would take me a long time to trust anyone again, whether man or woman. Maybe it was time to see a psychologist. As the divorce proceedings moved forward, I went back to work at the car dealership, but this time as a salesman. I made it clear to everyone that I was no longer the boss and only needed one sale a week to cover rent and groceries. I insisted on keeping it minimal, focusing on just one sale per week. When it came to court-mandated child support, I aimed to ensure that by the end of the month, I had no money left beyond my essential living expenses. Jenna hired a lawyer, and I was puzzled about how she could afford it. Perhaps he was working pro bono. They scrutinized my bank accounts and found nothing amiss with the proceeds from the sale. However, they didn't dig deep enough. Meanwhile, I heard from fellow salespeople that George had come into the dealership almost every day during the first 2 weeks, trying to get some work from Anna. She had firmly refused him each time, and eventually, he gave up. Now he regretted not getting his OSA certification, as the only job he could find was at a quick oil change place, earning just $13 an hour. I hoped Jenna had gone full-time, or they would struggle to make ends meet. I contacted the realtor and informed Jenna that I was putting the house on the market, anticipating a 50-50 split of our assets. She had already been served with an eviction notice, so she had to move out before the house was sold and closed. One evening, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, there was Jenna, standing there with an anxious expression. "What do you need?" I asked. "Can we talk?" she pleaded. "I don't think this is a good idea," I said. "We're in a lawsuit against each other. It's just me here, no lawyers. Can't we sit down and have a civil conversation?" she insisted. "Fine," I agreed. "But let's go to Denny's. There will be witnesses." I didn't trust her enough to be alone with her. At Denny's, we settled into a booth. After exchanging a few pleasantries, I cut to the chase. "Why, Jenna?" She looked down at the table, hesitating before she spoke. "The simple answer is that I liked both of you. I couldn't decide." "So, you were dating both of us at the same time?" I asked. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "George told me not to tell you because he knew it would ruin our personal and work relationship." I was stunned. "So, when I proposed, why did you say yes?" "Because I loved you," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "And George?" I pressed. "I loved him too," she said. "But I knew he would never be a suitable husband. When you asked me to marry you, George and I ended our relationship. I wanted to focus on us and our wedding preparations." I was reeling. "So, on our wedding day, while you were with him, you said, 'I'm marrying him, but you're still my man?'" Jenna began to cry uncontrollably. "Everything was wrong," she said between sobs. "I didn't know how to make it right." "What was it?" Jenna? I asked, desperate for clarity. She hesitated, her tears flowing freely, as she struggled to find the words. Here's an expanded and more engaging version of your text, tailored for an American audience. I didn't want to lose him, and he didn't want to lose me. Well, now you two have each other and your child. By the way, Jenna, I have to give credit where it's due, you did a great job with Carrie's name. I didn't even realize it until I had some time to reflect during the 3 months I spent on the road. I didn't know Carrie wasn't yours, I said. I genuinely didn't. Jenna looked at me with a mix of sadness and relief. Kurt, I wanted to talk to you today to tell you that I still love you. It's nice to hear from you, Jenna, I replied, but I don't think you truly understand what love is. I loved you more than anything in the world, but it's clear you can't say the same. I did love you, she said softly. I loved you with all my heart. But now, I can honestly say that I don't love you anymore. Now, I feel nothing but contempt. When I said this, Jenna's face fell as the reality of our relationships sank in. There would never be an us again. I had to ask her one more question. Have you ever stopped? She hesitated, then, apparently deciding it didn't matter anymore, she told me the truth. We never really stopped. We had our moments, but we'd get together usually twice a month. I had hoped for a different answer, but I was relieved she was honest. One more thing, I pressed. What happened about a year ago that made you start treating me so badly? Your contempt was so obvious. Jenna's face flushed red, and she became defensive. George kept insisting that we should try a threesome, not with you, but with someone else. I probably could have done it if you had been involved, but we never figured out how. His constant pressure made me resent you for something I knew you would never do. It might sound strange, but I thought I could have both of you loving me together, and I resented you for not being the person to make that happen. So, did you do it? I asked. No, she said. I thought about it, but then you left, and my whole world fell apart. Well, I said, now you can do whatever you want. It doesn't bother me anymore. Months later, we stood before a judge who finalized our divorce. George was there too, a silent witness to the end of our relationship. As we left the courthouse, Jenna suggested, maybe we could have a drink, just like old times. I agreed, though by then the animosity I felt towards them had faded. I thought, this will be the last time I have to be with them. They can now be alone and live their lives as they see fit. Let them wallow in their own mess, they deserve each other. Well, I thought with a hint of bitterness, Jenna will have to get used to a lower standard of living. Maybe the animosity hadn't completely disappeared, but I reminded myself, I might be Polish, but I am a respected person. Subscribe to our channel so your partner doesn't cheat on you, and be sure to check out our next story. Trust me, it's even more intense than this one. If you are under 18, you might want to steer clear of the next one. What did you think of our story today? I believe the man did absolutely the right thing after years of betrayal. What's your take? Share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next video.